Welcome to Potluck Politics. I'm Peter Roper. I'm fortunate to have a great guest today. The Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas, is back for actually the third time we've interviewed her. So thank you very much, Stephanie, for joining us and sharing your information.
Happy to be here.
Previously, we talked about state rules for elections. Now we face some big changes happening to our electoral processes coming from the federal government, the SAVE Act and President Trump's executive order, an end run on voting and elections, which seems to be usurping congressional law-making responsibilities. Let's start out with the SAVE Act. Could you talk a little bit about that? Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act is what they have called this. The Republicans, I think, are pushing this.
Yes, thank you. Definitely big things afoot in the federal government. So the SAVE Act is, the reason they say it's being proposed is to curtail non-citizen voting in U.S. elections. But the act goes much further than that, and I think more than most people realize. Instead of creating safeguards to prevent non-citizens from voting, what they are instead imposing are very restrictive regulations on every other voter. Right. Voter registration, the process of it, would move from, you wouldn't even be able to register online or by mail. You have to go in person. Restrictions for military members serving overseas. It requires reports to be made to the Department of Justice for any suspected allegations about voting, and on and on. There's really very little of good in this bill.
Pretty sad. It's pretty sad. Could you talk about the how it actually will affect people personally and their efforts to get registered or stay registered?
Yeah, part of the reason the federal government has not gotten very involved in elections is because every state does it differently. And Connecticut is a bit of an anomaly with we administer at the municipal level instead of at the county level. So what that means is there are a lot of differences from town to town. Like elections in, I don't know, North Stonington don't look the same as Stamford. Most of our election workforce is part-time. There are towns where our registrars only work 2 or 3 hours a month. So when you think about something like moving all voter registration and voter registration changes, so you move, you change your name, etc., all of that has to be done in person, presenting your original document. So the SAVE Act would require a birth certificate, a passport, or naturalization papers. A lot of people think you can use your real ID, but you cannot in this act. So I always say, like, people like to visualize. So imagine your mother is moving from her home to an assisted living facility or something, or a younger person is changing their name, something like that. Now, all of a sudden, they have to find their birth certificate and go in person. A lot of people have mobility issues, transportation issues. New Hampshire passed a similar law, and they had an election just a couple weeks ago. And there was an example of a woman who had been married 3 times. And her birth certificate name was different.
4 names, maybe?
No, but she only changed she didn't change her last name for each marriage. So they were requiring her divorce papers from a prior marriage, but she had lived in Florida then. And she's like, I long ago threw away those papers. She couldn't vote. End stop. So it's very disturbing on so many levels. This show cannot be long enough for me to explain all the ways it's dangerous.
Yeah, and there's actually penalties now for possibly minor mistakes by election workers who are volunteers.
So if an election worker makes a mistake in this paperwork, they could be jailed for up to 5 years. Criminal penalties. It's insane.
More cruelty. It seems like cruelty is the word. So then, on top of that, we now have a presidential executive order, which is going further and, adding to the SAVE Act, it looks like. Why is it so dangerous?
So, yeah, a couple of weeks ago, a presidential executive order came out. And of course, this is not said, but I believe it's because the president knows he does not have the votes to pass the SAVE Act. So the executive order is really an attempt to do an end run around Congress. Congress could set some of these standards, but the president cannot. It's unconstitutional. Federalism exists in the United States. The states are allowed to govern their elections. So this executive order, though, is even worse because within 30 days, so within 2 weeks, all of these types of changes are supposed to have happened. And we've gone through some of them, but again, you think of our part-time workforce. Somehow, within 30 days, they're supposed to be trained in how to actually authenticate these documents. How are our registrars supposed to know what a valid marriage license, divorce decree, birth certificate, etc. look like? They also would have to be trained to navigate. The executive order says that every local election worker around the country is to be granted access to the Social Security database and any federal database that's needed in order to validate voters. I don't know how they're supposed to be trained in how to operate these databases. And because people think, in-person registration. Last year in Connecticut, 250,000 people registered to vote. And that's just initial registration, not to mention address changes, name changes. And every time one of those things happen, you're supposed to also access this other federal database, which, by the way, costs $1.40 every time you run a search. And on top of that, you can't do a batch lookup. So you can't, for example, say these 200 people had changes this week. Let me just run it through. You literally have to look up each person and cross-reference data. I mean, it's just a nightmare. It would also require us within 30 days to reprint hundreds of thousands of voter registration forms and deliver them to 169 towns. And it would require that our military members serving overseas, if they register, imagine some 18-year-old enlists, goes to Syria, and then remembers there's an election coming up. Let me register to vote. He also would have to produce a birth certificate, not a military ID. It will no longer be accepted. And it just gets so much worse. My favorite thing about the executive order, I say sarcastically, is it actually doesn't even say you can use a birth certificate because, wait for it, because there's also an executive order banning birthright citizenship.
Right.
So therefore, a birth certificate can't prove citizenship. So now all of a sudden, a passport is naturalization papers are the only two valid forms of ID. So again, it just gets worse and worse.
Yeah, pretty discouraging. And I did read the executive order. I think it was on your information and your response, your press conference. Very good. I recommend it to anybody who wants to find it. Is it on your website?
I'm not. It may be on our YouTube channel, but you can also get it on the Connecticut network.
Yeah. And I have to say, I read through Trump's executive order once. What a lot of gobbledygook, really. It's like, I don't know how anybody can sort that out. And it's all based on election denial. They still seem like they're concerned about things that never happened. They've never been able to prove anything significant as far as fraud or abuse or people registering shouldn't or dead people voting. If they had information and proof, we would have heard about it over the last however many years.
All of these acts are, solutions of problems that don't exist
Yeah,
or
that
exist.
was my next comment.
I mean, they're at such a small level, like study after study. And just to be clear, many Republican-led states, either governors or secretaries, have been hearing this narrative, and many in their voter base have passed laws, etc. So they have conducted massive studies about non-citizen voting, fraud, etc. I mean, like massive studies going back 10, 20 years. States like Georgia, Iowa, I believe Ohio, many of these Republican-led states. And like, as you might expect, I believe, I forget what state it was, they had a list of something like 200,000 suspected non-citizen voting. But by the time they investigated them all, they found 2. And it was a mistake in both cases. So it's a solution in search of a problem, and it's going too far. And I really just underscore, I care most about Connecticut, and the cost to taxpayers would be astronomical.
Yeah, that's the other big, huge part of this. There's
I mean,
no
it's a
There's no
huge
funding.
cost.
This is the kind of thing that
yeah.
should be funded if you're going to make states try to do this.
Exactly.
Someone has to pay
Especially
for it.
within 30 days. I think it's also telling that 21 Republican secretaries wrote to the White House before the executive order about some of these database requirements and how they simply can't be done and would cost states so much money. And I thought, wow, like Democratic secretaries and Republican secretaries are raising some of the same issues.
And to make access easier for Social Security information and IRS information and State Department information, that's a nightmare just on its own, because who's going to control that and make sure that's safe?
I don't think anyone...
I don't want anybody looking up...
I don't think anyone envisions, like here in Connecticut, it would be like an assistant or deputy registrar, but across the country, it could be anyone. Like imagine the number of people who would then have access to our data without any training around
without any kind of clearance or training
treat that exactly.
or financial help.
Yeah.
So what do you recommend voters can do about this? Because it's huge, and the more people know about it, I'm sure the more people want to do something. So that's important.
Yeah, it's I think talking about it, it's a good question.
Well, you coming here is actually a good step.
Yeah,
so thank you.
And actually, it's funny. A Republican registrar reached out to me after she read the executive order, and she was like, "This would be so bad for Connecticut.
Yeah.
What should I do?" So to Republicans, I say, write to the White House, write to Mitch McConnell, who also, by the way, is against the SAVE Act. To Democrats, I say write to everybody. But just explain why. I mean, federalism exists for a reason. Elections are run very differently in every single state around the country. And people don't always understand those differences. They think they're run the same as it is in their state. So we should reach out to the White House. We should reach out to our congressional representatives. But we should also reach out to our state representatives, state senators, and town leaders to make sure that they are aware of these laws that are out there, so they can prepare and also offer their own opinions. Like town, first selectmen, mayors, etc. should be pushing back against this very hard, because their costs would go up astronomically.
And I know Common Cause has been circulating a petition on this very issue, and I think that's a good group to support too. And I have to say, I did click on your connection to the White House and filled everything out, all the information, which I really didn't want to give to the White House, but I thought it was worth doing. I got to the end and said, oh, sorry, we can't verify this now. Try again later.
Oh, no.
So I didn't get through.
Oh, no.
But I tried that, and it's not complicated. So
yes, it is an easy process.
If enough people do it, I think it might swamp them. Moving on. You came with a lot of things to talk about.
What else is there? No.
Another dangerous development is attacks on CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, and ISAC, I guess you say it?
Yeah, the
Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center.
Yes.
A lot of alphabet there.
Yeah,
but
CISA.
I'm sure you can explain it for us.
Oh gosh, CISA and the EIISAC, as they're
Is
known.
that EIEIO?
And I'm trying to think how to put this in layman's terms. So basically, those both entities have to do with cybersecurity, election interference, and election security, both in terms of infrastructure, like hardware.
Yeah. And these exist. These
and also threat monitoring. Yeah. So just to let you know, how do I explain it? So like CISA and the EIISAC, for example, in Connecticut last year did a few things. Poll workers our registrars were concerned about election security. So CISA is the entity that came in and gave every single registrar and town clerk around the state de-escalation training. They monitor foreign malign influence. When you may recall there were like the white powder incidents in about 6 states. They were the ones.
Fires and drop boxes.
Yeah, they're the ones who monitor all of that, make sure we get rapid response information, and advise on how to solve it. They do many different things. The EIISAC, many election workers in Connecticut were members. And they get intelligence information, some training, etc. And it's a lot more detailed than that, but think election security, like sort of frontline election security against domestic issues, foreign issues, etc. So the EIISAC has actually already been disbanded. They were all laid off, and those services, all but 3 of the services ceased.
And Elon Musk is going to take care of it now, I guess?
I don't know who's going to take care of it. And CISA was also, most of their employees were laid off, and they went under administrative review. At the end of that review period, a few weeks ago, they said they reached some decisions, but those decisions have not been publicly released. So all secretaries of both parties, we've been trying to communicate with them to find out what this means, because many states, Connecticut is lucky, we have pretty strong cybersecurity at the state level, but many states rely on CISA for all of their cybersecurity needs. So we, as you might imagine, all secretaries are very concerned that our election system will now be less safe if these services aren't restored elsewhere. So we're like in a real-time situation here. We don't know quite what's going to happen.
So in summary, I guess the people, the president, and the Republicans who are most concerned about fraud and messing with our elections are getting rid of safeguards that protect our elections.
100%.
Question mark.
I mean,
why would they do that?
It's very disturbing.
It's sad. It's really sad. Anything citizens can do about this? Who are people that they should be contacting on this issue?
You know, honestly, I'm not 100% sure. I always say it's a good idea to reach out to the White House
congressional people,
and
I'm
your
sure.
congressional delegation. You know, there's so many issues going on right now. It pays to just make sure this one stays front and center. It goes without saying that elections are the cornerstone of a representative democracy. And without some of these safeguards, it makes us all a little less safe. And it's disturbing.
Yeah. Moving on, thank you for all that, but moving on, bills in the Connecticut legislature that might be affecting voting and I guess your office and the issues we've been talking about.
Oh my gosh, there's so
There's
many.
a list of them.
Let's see. Every year there's so many bills. So a couple of things. We obviously learned a lot about early voting this past go round. So we've put in a bunch of little tweaks and changes. But one of the most
And I
major.
assume funding requests, because there wasn't much funding involved for that, was there?
Yeah, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So one of the biggest tweaks, I think everyone knows, our tabulators, the machines you feed the ballot into, were very old and failing, which is why we had the envelope system for early voting. But our new tabulators are actually being deployed right now as we speak to most towns. So we can actually...
Not connected to the internet.
They're not connected to the internet. No, Connecticut
And
has
paper-
very good
paper
election
ballots.
security. Like, we're the land of steady habits, and the good news is we missed that phase that a lot of states went, like some states like don't even have paper ballots anymore.
Yeah.
So like Connecticut has never done that. But we'll be able, with early voting, hopefully if the law passes, be able to feed the ballot right into the tabulator like we do on election day. And no, there's no money currently allocated to the towns for early voting. So we have advocated for that. And there's a lot of different pieces of legislation in front of the General Assembly. I encourage people to follow along.
And I know civic involvement and education is one of your, I guess, more private issues, but that seems important too, to get people involved and educate them about how democracy is supposed to work, how government works.
Yes, I always encourage people to visit our website. We have a lot of civic tools up there. We have something that we call the Power of Civics on our website. I think it's powerofcivics.ct.gov, which most people took a class in school and maybe never thought about it again without realizing that laws change every single year. So the Power of Civics has about like 45, 50 different things that teach you about the process, teach you to have a voice in the process. I think it's a great cornerstone of our website.
Great, especially now. We're in trouble.
We all need to know. Civic knowledge is so important. Even though I had always voted in every single election, I never really thought much more about what I could be doing until I became a state legislator. As a legislator, I wanted input from my constituents so I could know like what I should advocate for or to get a second opinion about bills, but very few people were participating. And that really opened my eyes about how much more we all should be doing to make sure that the laws reflect the values that we believe in.
Yeah, Natalie Billing, the head of the Democratic Party, and I did a program just on involvement in local government and how local government is. Groton's pretty complicated because it's got a lot of different sections and different governments and different access points.
I mean, one thing I do want to point out that people don't really pay attention to this. In presidential election years, we have about this past year, 76% turnout. Last cycle, 78%. But in local elections, that drops to about 32%. So all the people who are registered to vote and think it's important enough to vote in a presidential, like totally disappear when it comes to their town. And we all know it's in your town. That's your property taxes, your schools, all of your services. So I hope more people start voting in local elections as well.
We're getting down near the end here. Some of these bills, have some of them already come out of committee and been passed, or are they still in process?
There haven't been that many session days. The committee work has done, so many of these bills, most bills have passed out of committee already, but they haven't been called on the floor yet. So I do encourage people it's always good to follow along with the legislature. You can watch these sessions on the Connecticut network. You can still write to your legislators about things you care about, so that they can vote yay or nay on the bills.
My rep is Baumgartner, and he's very good. Every Friday sends out a news blast
nice.
and tells what's going on and tells how to plug in if you want to.
Oh, that's great.
So it's great.
Yeah.
And I think Christine Conley did that too.
Very nice.
That's helpful. I try to look at that every Friday and see what's coming up. And he also has a lot of community stuff going on too.
And people think like, oh, I don't know how to interact, but the shortest email I ever got when I was a legislator was 2 words. Like, it just said, vote no. And people think it has to be very like formal and official,
right.
but no, like, just use your own words and say what you think.
And testifying even isn't that complicated because it's our government. I mean,
exactly.
It's how we can communicate with our government effectively.
Exactly.
And remotely or in person.
I've seen a lot of 2nd, 3rd, 4th graders testify. If they can do it, you can do it.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end here. Any other issues that we may have skipped over that we should have covered?
I think you just hit the nail on the head. We live in a representative democracy, and that means our government represents us. But how can they represent us if all we do is vote? We have to get involved. It takes very little effort to send a message to the White House or to your congressional representatives or to your state representatives and senators or to your local officials. And I feel like sometimes things are very contentious and people like just get so angry. If you are regularly engaging throughout the year, you don't have to get that angry. You can actually intervene at a time when you can still have impact.
Well, luckily, those of us here in Connecticut, we're a blue state, and this is one reason why it's good to be a blue state. We have representatives and people working for us that care about people, care about voting, care about doing it right. So thank you for that. I'm sure you'll let us know if there's anything else. You're always welcome to come back here.
Thank you.
But we do appreciate you coming to SEC TV because we can reach a few people and spread around as much as possible. But keep up the good work, and thank you for doing this.
You too, for shedding a light, and to everyone out there, yes, get involved in your government.
Yeah.
It's easier than it sounds.
Thank you for watching. This has been Peter Rope with Potluck Politics with our Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas. Always appreciate it. Please get involved, get yourself educated, and be well.